Admiral William F. Halsey, Jr. assumed command of the South Pacific area on the 18th of October, replacing Admiral Gormley. At 59 years of age, Halsey brought with him a wealth of experience accumulated over decades of naval service. His career had begun when he graduated from the Naval Academy in 1904, and he received his commission as an ensign 2 years later. During the First World War, he led destroyer operations in waters controlled by the British. His education continued through the Navy and Army War Colleges between 1933 and 1934, after which he completed training as a naval aviator at Pensacola. From that point forward, his professional life became increasingly focused on aviation and carrier operations. Between 1935 and 1937, he commanded the carrier Saratoga, then spent a year as the commanding officer at Pensacola before taking charge of Carrier Division II, which included the Yorktown and Enterprise, as a rear admiral in 1938. The following year found him leading Carrier Division I, comprising the Saratoga and Lexington, and by 1940, having been promoted to Vice Admiral, he commanded the aircraft battle force of the Pacific Fleet. When Pearl Harbor suffered the Japanese attack on the 7th of December 1941, Halsey had been at sea with a carrier task force, which fortunately remained undamaged and became available for conducting raids against the Gilbert, Marshall, Wake, and Marcus Islands during the spring of 1942. He also led the task force that transported Lieutenant Colonel James H. Doolittle's medium bombers within striking range of Tokyo in April of that year. Illness prevented his participation in the Battle of Midway, but the aggressive commander had now returned to active duty, bringing with him an audacious spirit that would significantly influence operations in the South Pacific. Although Halsey could not visit Guadalcanal until the 8th of November, he fully understood the challenges confronting him. His immediate decision concerned whether to evacuate or maintain the position on Guadalcanal. Following the severe bombardments and the landing of Hyakutake's forces on the 20th of October, General Vandergrift travelled personally to meet with Admiral Halsey aboard the flagship Argonne in Noumea Harbour. Also present at this crucial meeting were Lieutenant General Thomas H. Holcomb, the Marine Corps Commandant who was conducting an inspection tour, General Harmon, Admiral Turner, and Major General Alexander M. Patch, commander of the Americal Division. Vandergrift communicated to Halsey that maintaining Guadalcanal remained feasible, provided he received stronger support. Recognizing the strategic necessity of holding Guadalcanal, the admiral committed all his available forces to support the effort. Among his first actions was dispatching Kincaid's force to the Santa Cruz Islands, where engagement with Japanese forces occurred on the 26th of October. Additional resources for implementing aggressive operations would soon reach the South Pacific area. President Roosevelt and the Joint Chiefs of Staff recognized the extremely serious nature of the situation on Guadalcanal. On the 21st of October, following an urgent request from the South Pacific for additional forces, Admiral King informed Admiral Nimitz that the Joint Chiefs had authorized a substantially enhanced air establishment for the South Pacific to be positioned there by the 1st of January 1943. 3 days later, President Roosevelt issued a memorandum to the Joint Chiefs expressing his desire that every possible weapon be sent to both Guadalcanal and North Africa, even if such shipments required reducing commitments in other areas. In his response, Admiral King outlined the considerable force that would be diverted, including 1 battleship, 6 cruisers, 2 destroyers, and 24 submarines, along with torpedo boats, 75 fighter aircraft, and 15 torpedo bombers. 30 transports had been allocated to the South Pacific for November, with an additional 20 vessels of 7,000 tons to be diverted later. General Marshall, in his reply to the President, stated that the outcome of the ongoing battle for Guadalcanal would determine the situation in the South Pacific. He considered the ground forces in the South Pacific adequate for security against the Japanese, emphasizing that the effectiveness of these ground troops depended primarily on the capability to transport them to combat areas and maintain them there. Army air strength in the South Pacific at that time consisted of 46 heavy bombers, 27 medium bombers, and 133 fighters. 23 heavy bombers were being flown in, and 53 fighters were being shipped from Hawaii to address the emergency. MacArthur had received orders to provide bomber reinforcements and P-38 replacement parts to the South Pacific. The only additional measures General Marshall could implement, beyond the possible transfer of the 25th Division from MacArthur's area to the South Pacific, included the temporary diversion of 3 heavy bombardment squadrons from Australia to New Caledonia, and the release of P-40 and P-39 from Hawaii and Christmas Island. During October, the Japanese had come dangerously close to annihilating American air power on Guadalcanal. Despite their maximum efforts, the airfield remained under American control and recovered from the severe damage inflicted, although air strength on Guadalcanal, diminished by operational losses and Japanese bombardment, remained low throughout the remainder of October. Only 34 aircraft were operational on the 16th of October, but reinforcement arrived that same day with 20 F-4Fs and 12 SBDS. By the 26th of October, after a series of bombing raids and shelling attacks, merely 29 operational aircraft remained at Henderson Field: 12 F-4Fs, 11 SBDS, 3 P-400s, and 3 P-39s. By the conclusion of November, with the reduction in Japanese attacks against the Lunga area and the increase in Allied strength throughout the South Pacific, the Guadalcanal Air Force had expanded considerably, although as late as the 10th of November, fuel shortages prevented heavy bombers from utilizing Henderson Field. General MacArthur promised on the 14th of November to send 8 P-38s to the South Pacific. By mid-November, aviation units operating at Lunga Airfield totaled 1,748 men, 1,261 from Marine Air Group 14, 294 from Marine Air Group 142, 33 naval pilots, 144 from the 347th Army Fighter Group, and 16 from the 37th Army Fighter Squadron. By the 21st of November, the entire 5th Army Heavy Bombardment Group, which had participated in the Battle of Midway like the 11th, had arrived in the South Pacific to operate from Espiritu Santo. P-38s had reached Guadalcanal for permanent basing there, and B-17s were using the field regularly, although fuel shortages continued to restrict operations. On the 24th of November, 94 aircraft on Guadalcanal were operational, including 15 P-39s, 1 P-40, 8 B-17, 11 P-38s, 9 TBFs, 6 New Zealand Hudsons, 29 F-4Fs, and 15 SBDS. By the 30th of November, additional reinforcements had increased the total to 188 planes of all types. Plans for constructing an additional airfield on Guadalcanal were prepared for implementation by November. Prior to Admiral Halsey assuming command, the 1st Battalion of the 147th Infantry, a separate regiment, had departed from Tongatabu with orders to occupy Ndeni. General Harmon maintained his conviction that occupying Ndeni would constitute a needless waste of effort. He presented his views to Halsey, who, after consulting with his subordinates, accepted Harmon's assessment. On the 20th of October, he redirected the 147th Infantry to Guadalcanal. The Ndeni operation was permanently cancelled. Halsey decided to deploy the 147th Infantry to Guadalcanal to provide security for constructing an airstrip at a location sufficiently east of Lunga to allow fighter planes at Lunga Point adequate time to rise for defence should the Japanese attack the eastern field. Admiral Turner selected Aola Bay, situated approximately 33 miles east-southeast of Lunga Point, as the landing site and airfield location. The Aola Bay Landing Force, as ultimately constituted under Colonel W. B. Tuttle's command, comprised 1,700 men from the 1st Battalion, 147th Infantry, 2 companies from the 2nd Marine Raider Battalion, a detachment from the 5th Defence Battalion, Provisional Battery K from the 246th Field Artillery Battalion of the Americal Division equipped with British 25-pounders, and 500 naval construction troops. While the practicality of taking Ndeni was being evaluated, Halsey's headquarters completed plans for deploying strong reinforcements to Lunga Point. On the 29th of October, Admiral Turner informed General Vandegrift that his requests for additional ammunition, material and support were receiving serious consideration. The Admiral planned to have 2 ships, land stores, ammunition, and 2 batteries of 155mm guns on the 2nd of November. Arrangements for moving the 8th Marines of the 2nd Marine Division to Guadalcanal received the highest priority, with that regiment scheduled to land on the 3rd of November. Turner expressed his desire, somewhat unnecessarily, that Vandegrift assume the offensive after the 8th Marines arrived. Another Army regiment and the 1st Marine Aviation Engineer Battalion, Turner announced, would arrive around the 10th of November, and the 2nd Raider Battalion might possibly land at Beaufort Bay on the southern coast. Rear Admiral Daniel J. Callahan commanded the task force constituted to transport the 8th Marines and the Aola Force to Guadalcanal. The Aola Force, carried on 3 transports and 2 destroyer transports, executed an unopposed landing at Aola Bay on the 4th of November. They established a beachhead 600 yards long, a short distance east of the Aola River. Once the beachhead was secured, command of Colonel Tuttle's landing force transferred from Admiral Callahan to General Vandegrift. The transports continued unloading until 2 in the morning on the 6th of November before withdrawing. Admiral Halsey directed the raider companies to remain at Aola Bay instead of departing with the transports as initially planned. The troops established a defensive perimeter, and on the 29th of November, 4 transports landed the 3rd Battalion of the 147th Infantry, additional elements from the 246th Field Artillery Battalion, part of the 9th Marine Defence Battalion, and more Seabees. The Seabees began working on an airfield immediately following the landing on the 4th of November, but the entire area proved unsatisfactory. The earth was swampy, and tree stumps with deep tangled roots slowed the clearing process significantly. On the 22nd of November, Vandegrift, who had opposed the selection of Aola Bay from the outset, recommended to Turner that the area be abandoned. Admiral Fitch, commanding South Pacific land-based aircraft, also disapproved of the Aola Bay site. Halsey consented to its abandonment, and the Aola Force, minus the 2nd Raider Battalion, was subsequently removed to Volinawa at Coley Point to construct an airfield on a grassy plain. The relocation to Coley Point was completed by the 3rd of December, where the force was joined by the 18th Naval Construction Battalion and the remainder of the 9th Defence Battalion. While the initial landings at Aola Bay were being executed on the 4th of November, additional American troops and weapons were strengthening Lunga Point. The Alchaiba and the Fuller landed stores and ammunition, together with 1 Army and 1 Marine Corps 155mm gun battery at Lunga Point on the 2nd of November. These batteries, F Battery of the 244th Coast Artillery Battalion and another battery from the 5th Defence Battalion, brought in the heaviest American artillery dispatched to Guadalcanal up to that time, the first suitable for effective counter-battery fire. Following the landing of a Japanese force east of Coley Point on the night of the 2nd to 3rd of November, Vandegrift requested that Halsey expedite the arrival of the 8th Marines. Callahan's task force, delayed by the proximity of enemy forces, sailed into Sea Lark Channel on the 4th.